this tutorial I'll be explaining the advanced Java concept of two-dimensional arrays. I'll be explaining what two-dimensional arrays are like in terms of usage and coding and what makes them different from one-dimensional arrays. So to better illustrate this concept, I have created a PowerPoint presentation, which I'll be starting out with. So as I said, I'll be talking about two-dimensional arrays in this tutorial. And roughly this tutorial can be broken up in two pieces. I'm going to explain what two-dimensional arrays are like, and I'm going to demonstrate how two-dimensional arrays are coded and how they work. So first, a little explanation. When you are watching this video, I'm assuming you already know what a one-dimensional array is and how to code it and what it's like. But just to refresh your mind, I will give a little explanation on that first. So essentially, a one-dimensional array is a variable that can hold multiple values. In this case, I have visualized this using a single column table that contains multiple rows. And each cell in this table can basically contain a value. In this case, I have enough space for 5 values. These values can be set and retrieved using the index number. So the first value stored in this array would be referred to as index 0, while the fifth value or last value would be under index 4. As you probably all know, indexes from arrays start counting with 0. So an array of length 5 has index 0 to 4. So this being a one-dimensional array, let's now take a look what a two-dimensional array is like. Well, a two-dimensional array is essentially an array inside an array. So instead of using index 0 in the array that I've just shown to store a single value, for example the number 42, it in this case contains another array containing, of course, as all arrays do, multiple values. So in this particular case, under each index I can store an array of 4 values. Or I'm showing an array of 4 values. And as with all arrays, these second level arrays can have their values get and set using index numbers, starting from 0, and in this case the highest index being 3. So say if I want to set the very first value in the array stored under the very first index on the first level array, I would have to use the index number 00. To store the very last value in the array on the last index on the first level, I would have to use the coordinates 4, 3, or coordinates index number 4, 3. So that being a visualization of the array, let's now talk about the example we're going to do today. So how can we code this? Well, I will show you how to code it in an example. And I'm going to write a program that stores the title and publish year of books on a particular shelf using two-dimensional arrays. For example, books like The Hobbit from J.R.R. Tolkien and Twilight from Stephanie Meyer. Well, on a second thought, let's not do Twilight. This one's better. Bram Stoker's Dracula. So basically books like this can be stored on the shelf. So if I were to store this, what I would probably do is I would use every single index on the first level array as a shelf, while using the array on the second level to store the names of the book on the shelf. For example, I would store The Hobbit under index 00. I would store Dracula under index 01, because they are both on a single shelf, in this case shelf number 0, or 0 representing that shelf. So the shelf below that, whom I'm referring to as shelf number 1, for example the book The Lord of the Rings that would be on that shelf would be stored under index 10. So in this way I can store multiple book titles and all keep them together based on the shelf they are on, using a two-dimensional array. Okay, now let me show you how this is done in coding. So the coding of the two-dimensional array example I'm going to do in Eclipse. And as you can see, I've created a Java project already. So the only thing that's left for me to do is create a Java class that I'll be using for this example. So the Java class I'm going to call a two-dimensional array example. And let me just enlarge it for better viewing and get rid of some of this comment code. So as you may remember, when I want to create a one-dimensional array, I have to indicate the data type, in this case a string, followed by square brackets, indicating the name of the array, so in this case book titles, followed by the equal sign, followed by new, followed by the data type again, followed by square brackets again, and finally I had to indicate the length of the array, in this case 2. So that's a one-dimensional array. So how do I declare a two-dimensional array? Well, actually it's very simple. To indicate that the array is two-dimensional, I add another pair of square brackets behind it. So now my array has 2 dimensions. I also add another pair of square brackets at the back. And of course I need to indicate the length of the second dimension. So the first dimension had a length of 2. My second dimension is going to have a length of 3. That's pretty much it. So right now I have a two-dimensional array with the size 2 by 3. So what if I want to set a value for a value in this array? So very simple. I'm going to use the variable book titles. First I have to indicate which index I want to set this value on. So in this case I want to set the very first index in the very first. Basically I want to set the very first value. So that will be index 0 in one dimension and index 0 in the second dimension, followed by equals, followed by the name The Hobbit. So say if I want to add another book in the same first level index, so that's my antivirus. Again I'm going to say index 0, but on the first level. On the second level I'm going to use index 1, and I'm going to set the value Dracula. Then moving on to the second index in the array, so the second index on the highest level, I'm going to put something on book titles, index 1, and since I want to store the first value under there, I'm going to say index 0, and the book title that I'm going to store there is The Lord of the Rings. Okay, then to prove that this actually works, I'm going to print out the titles of these books. So for example, the book under index 0, 0 is going to be retrieved from the two-dimensional array. So if I want to retrieve something, I do book titles 0, 0, index 0 for the first level, index 0 for the second level. Then to retrieve the second book that I stored, well in this case it was still index 0 on the first level, but index 1 on the second level. So let's just correct it here as well. Followed by, well, the Lord of the Rings, which was on the second index on the highest level, and the first index on the second level. So I need to reflect that there as well. So now let's just run this. So if this is correct, then basically the titles The Hobbit, Dracula and Lord of the Rings should appear. So there we are. The Hobbit, Dracula, Lord of the Rings. To further show to you how these values are actually stored, I'm going to place a breakpoint here and run in debug mode. So let's open up my variables. So I have my two-dimensional array, book titles here, which contains 2 values, respectively under index 0 and 1. When I open up 0, I can actually see there's another 3 values being stored there, from which the first index contains The Hobbit, the second index contains Dracula, third index doesn't have a value yet, but could possibly contain a value. Moving on to the next index, well, only one title stored there, where 3 can be stored. On the first index, so index 0, we have the Lord of the Rings. So that's pretty much that. So this is how you can manually assign values to a two-dimensional array and retrieve values from a two-dimensional array. Alternatively, I could have retrieved a value like this and then print it there. This is the same thing. But what would be really interesting is how I can dynamically fill these values in the two-dimensional array, because I don't want to hard fix them with all the index numbers. So yeah, that's what I will be showing in my next example. So what would be interesting in this case, as I mentioned in my PowerPoint presentation, I want to store a number of books on a certain shelf. So in this case, the highest level array 2 represents my shelf, so I got 2 shelves. The second dimension in the array, the second level, basically indicates the books on that particular shelf. So I can store 3 books on a shelf, and I got 2 shelves, so 6 books in total. So let's just see how I can dynamically fill this using code. And to add some dynamic behavior, I'm going to declare a scanner so I can read some keyboard input. So static scanner input equals new scanner, which is using the system.in to read its value. And let me just handle the import. Scanner is located in the java.util class. And to capture my keyboard input, I'm going to use a delimiter which responds to the enter key, which is \r\n. Okay. So what I need to do is basically I need to prompt my user 6 times. So I can key in 6 books, 3 for each shelf, and I got 2 shelves. So again, 2 times 3 is 6. So the first thing I need to do is I need to loop through the bookshelves. So for that I'm going to create a for loop with a integer I equals 0. And this I will keep on looping as long as it's smaller than the length of book titles. The length in this case would be 2. And each time I loop, I increase this by 1. Okay, and to indicate which shelf I'm on, I'm going to print my shelf number using a print line. And I, in this case, the variable I represents my shelf number. So basically right now, if I print this, I would see shelf 0 and shelf 1, so 2 shelves. However, normally humans would not say shelf 0, they would say shelf 1 and shelf 2. So to compensate for that, I'm going to say, well, not shelf I, but shelf I plus 1. So now I will actually show shelf 1 and shelf 2. So for each shelf, I need to prompt my user to key in 3 books. So again, to ensure I can prompt for 3 books, I'm going to create another for loop inside this for loop. And this for loop is going to use a counter named k, which is going to start with the value of 0. And I will continue looping while k is smaller than 3, because I want to store 3 books. Each time k increases by 1. So right now I'm going to loop 2 times here, and inside these 2 times I'm going to loop 3 times there, so 6 times in total. So then I should just prompt my user to provide some input. Enter a book title. After which I'm simply going to read this title using my input scanner. So for string that would be input.next. So at this point I would have captured the title from my keyboard, after which I want to store it. So So I want to store it in my book titles array, and first I need to indicate which bookshelf is on, whether or not it's bookshelf 1 or 2, or in array indexes bookshelf 0 and 1. So how can I know which shelf I'm currently on? Well, I can do that based on my I counter. So I'm going to say index I for the first level. Then I need to indicate which book I'm going to store. Well, how do I know which book I'm on? Well, I can use my counter k for that. So I'm going to set k as the index for that, which means that my book title will be stored under index I and k respectively. So only thing that's left for me to do is actually assign a value for title in here. And after that I'm simply going to do a little print line to indicate that I'm done. And I'm mostly doing this so I can review the data in my array. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to use a breakpoint to step through this array once or twice. We'll see how it goes. Then I'm gonna keep on running the program and show you at the end what everything is stored, how everything is stored. So let's just run this in debug mode. So I've stopped at my for loop, and as you can see my whole array is empty at this point. So I'm going to step through, in which I'm going to print the shelf number. So shelf 1 is printed. Please note that I, despite me printing it as 1 over here, in reality I is still 0. So now I'm going into my second loop, and I'm going to print out, well, enter a book title, then actually receive the keyboard input. So I'm going to indicate the Hobbit, enter, after which the Hobbit is captured as the title. Actually I should have used the print just now. Anyway, for this example it doesn't matter so much. Which is then going to be stored in book titles IK. So if I now look at 0, 0, because I is 0 and K is 0, index 0, 0 now contains the Hobbit. So let's do another one. So again we are repeating the inner loop. Again I'm prompting for input, enter a book title, after which I actually have the key in the title, so Dracula, enter. So the title is now Dracula, which is going to be stored in the two-dimensional array under value 0, 1, because I is still 0 and K is still 1. So this will actually repeat another quite a few more times. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to cancel this breakpoint and resume. So I have to key in another title, so what shall I do for my third book? The Hunger Games. After which I will move on to shelf number 2, because the inner loop has now looped 3 times. Meaning I will start here again, move to shelf 2, start a new loop, and then I'm entered for another key in, then I'm requested another book. Okay, let's just add a breakpoint here, just so I can show all of you how this progresses. So for another book title I'm going to key in Game of Thrones. After which my program stops, just so you can take a look. So after executing this line, you can actually see that index 1, 0 now contains the value Game of Thrones. Why? Because I is 1 and K is 0. Okay, now I'm really gonna just continue my program. So for another book that I'm prompted for, well, what shall I call it? Miffy Goes to the Zoo. And what other books do we got? Java for Dummies. So now I've hit the end. So my program stops again, and you can see that, well, at the end of it all, my first shelf contains the Hobbit, Dracula and the Hunger Games. My second shelf contains Game of Thrones, Miffy Goes to the Zoo, and Java for Dummies. And that's it, and that's how you dynamically fill up an array using scanner input. So what if at the end of it all I want to print out all these values? Well, that would be actually can be done very easily. For the most part, I can even recycle the same code, almost the same code for filling up. So let me just create another for loop. What am I doing wrong here? Okay, maybe I'll find out in a moment. For integer I equals 0. Keep on looping while I is smaller than book titles dot length and I++. Oh, see, it was just a glitch in Eclipse. So then I'd be looping through my shelves again, like just now. So in this case I don't want to print my shelf number. Instead I'm just straight away going on to the books on that shelf. So for integer k equals 0, continue looping while k is smaller than 3, k++. So in this case I simply want to print the title. So first I'm going to retrieve the title for this particular index. So for that I'm going to create a string. And how can I retrieve a particular title? Well, I simply look at the book titles variable, then indicate give me the title on index I, meaning with the shelf that I'm currently on, and index k, which is the book that I'm currently at, and simply print this title. So now if I run this program, I will again be prompted for 6 books. So that was The Hobbit, Dracula, The Hunger Games. What else? Java for Dummies, The Lord of the Rings, and last one, I'm not going to use Game of Thrones, I'm going to use The Lord of the Flies. So all 6 are keyed in, followed by the second loop that prints all of them, so resulting in this particular list. The Hobbit, Dracula, The Hunger Games, Java for Dummies, Lord of the Rings, and Lord of the Flies. So that's respectively storing the values using my input and printing the values using a similar structure. So you may remember from my presentation, I don't just want to store book titles, I also want to store publish years. So in this case I'm going to create, no, not a string array, I'm going to create a 2-dimensional array from integers, because published year is a number, and this one is also going to be 2-dimensional, so integer square bracket, publish years equals new integer 2-dimensional array. And in terms of the length, it has to be the same length as the titles, because I'm going to store 6 books, which means I want to store 6 published years. And since these books are on 2 shelves, that would I create a length of 2, followed by 3 books, because there's 3 books on one shelf, same as here. Which also means that if I'm going to store a book under a certain index in book titles, I want to store the publish year under the exact same index in the publish years 2-dimensional array. This will make it very easy for me to find back the publish year that belongs to a particular book. Okay, so now I've created this 2-dimensional array publish years. I'm going to modify my input code to also prompt for the publish year. So first let me just correct this mistake of using a print line. So after first I prompt for my book title, followed by me storing the book title in the book title two-dimensional array. After that, I simply prompt my user for the publish year. And I'm going to store the publish year as an integer year, and also get my scanner to actually get the integer that I'm keying in. For that, I'm using my next int operation. Finally, I need to store the publish year under the exact same index as I did with book titles. So I'm simply going to say publish years equals, square bracket I, because it's shelf I, book index k, because that's the book I'm at, and then simply store the value of year. Okay, so now I'm going to run this program again and hold the program at this point. So you can see that whatever publish year I key in will actually be stored under the same index as its respective title. So let's just run in debug mode again. So enter a book title, The Hobbit, which is published in the year 1937. And again I made a mistake. Should be a print. Let me just redo it. Okay. The Hobbit, published in year 1937. And Dracula, published in the year 1897. Finally, The Hunger Games. And to be honest, I've got no idea what year The Hunger Games was published. So I'll just take a wild guess that it's 2003. So okay, moving on to shelf number 2. The Lord of the Rings. Also no idea when it was published, and I'm going to guess that it was around the 1940s. And then enter another title, so that would be, well, The Lord of the Flies, which I believe, again I'm just making this up, was published around the 1960s. Finally, Java for Dummies, which is probably a real book. Let's just say 1999. Okay, and now my program halts again at this point, so I can take a look at the array. So in this case I'm going to, well, I have The Hobbit, Dracula, The Hunger Games, Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Flies, Java for Dummies here. Then if I open up the publish years and take a look in there, you will actually see all the years I've keyed in. So 1937 under index 00, which is the same index as The Hobbit. Dracula 1897 under index 01, which is indeed 01, so it matches. So basically, by using the same index, I can retrieve the title and the publish year, even though I have it stored in different variables. Okay, now I'll just complete the program. So it prints out those titles again. Or at least it should. Dracula, The Hunger Games. Oh yes, of course. And the other 3. My breakpoint was stopping the program from completing. Okay. Which leaves me with one last remaining task to do. Is I don't want to just print the title, I also want to print the publish year. So in this case I'm going to say integer publish year, and I'm going to retrieve it from the publish years array, two-dimensional array. And since the index matches the index of the title, I can simply say get it from index I and index k. Then I'll just add the publish year to my system.out.println line, separated by a space. And basically to avoid, well, I mean, I think everybody believes by now this works. So I'm just going to do a normal run without debugging. So book title, The Hobbit, 1937, Dracula, which is from 1897, book title, The Hunger Games, well, 2003, I have no idea. The Lord of the Rings, around 1940s, followed by Java for Dummies, 1999, and finally let's just do Game of Thrones, which was maybe 1995, I don't really know. Okay, enter, after which, well, the values stored in the array are printed to get the title and publish year, and as you can see, The Hobbit 1937, Dracula 1897, Hunger Games 2003, and so forth are basically printed as matching pairs, even though they were stored in separate arrays. So that's pretty much all I wanted to show for my little explanation of two-dimensional arrays. I hope it was helpful, and see you at the next tutorial.